Hello, you may be wondering.
What the hell is this?
And don't panic. Don't panic. I can explain. You've already clicked the thumbnail, so hopefully you'll hear me out on this. So let's just throw those pitchforks away, and I can introduce you to myself and my friends. My name is Wyatt, and these are my friends Ninja and Slur. Together, we're yet another response podcast, or simply,
Yarp.
Our podcast is devoted to objective analysis of art, specifically pop culture such as movies, TV shows, video games, and anime. As a response-oriented podcast, we typically respond to the content of other creators. We analyze and critique their arguments and respond to them in real time. This can be a lot of fun and lead to some very insightful or interesting conversations. We've enjoyed creating this type of content, but as aspiring content creators ourselves, we wanted to do something a bit more. Our group was formed out of a mutual appreciation for another podcast, Every Frame a Pause, otherwise known as EFAP. EFAP also does response content, but they are also established content creators in their own right. One of the recurring guests of EFAP released a video on Spider-Man 2, analyzing how well the movie held up to the same objective standards that we use when critiquing media we dislike, such as the sequel trilogy or The Last of Us Part 2. He dared to ask if Spider-Man 2 was really as good as we all remembered it to be, or if that was simply the effect of nostalgia and rose-tinted glasses. It's a pretty great video, and we recommend you go check it out. I'll put a link in the description below. Inspired not only by the concept of the video, but also by the format of his arguments, we began to work on our own original work. We knew that we wanted our first project to be something special. Not a hot take per se, just an objective analysis. We wanted to aim high, something beloved. Not just by the general audiences and critics alike, but more importantly, something that we held in high regard ourselves. That was the condition that would strengthen the quality of this project and push the boundaries of our analysis. There were a couple options that came up during our brainstorming sessions, but as soon as this one came up, the decision was almost instantly agreed upon. Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight Trilogy. It seemed so logical. Spider-Man 2 and The Dark Knight both get brought up as the cream of the crop when it comes to superhero movies. Perhaps if Spider-Man 2 was more flawed than we had previously thought, maybe, just maybe, The Dark Knight was too. We had to know. We wanted to find out for ourselves. Do these movies that received a bunch of awards hold up as well as we remember them? We wanted to put that to the test. We knew going in there would be a few issues here and there. What we were not prepared for was for these movies to almost entirely fall apart. Now, before we get into the analysis itself, it's important that we acknowledge why these movies need to be analyzed in the first place. Let's put them under the objective lens and see how well they hold up to scrutiny. If you ask most people about these movies, even now, over 10 years later, they would say that Batman Begins was really good, easily an 8 or 9 out of 10. The Dark Knight is rated even higher, usually getting a 9 or even a perfect 10, making it widely accepted as the crown jewel of the trilogy. More importantly, it's often praised as one of the pinnacles of storytelling when it comes to superhero movies. The Dark Knight Rises is often met with a bit more of a mixed response. While most people still consider it to be a good or even great film, somewhere between a 6 or an 8, for instance, it's still widely accepted to be the weakest entry of the trilogy, even by die-hard fans. So now that we understand where these movies reside, the question is, do they deserve to be there? Have they earned their place upon that pedestal? Do they deserve to be called the gold standard? Well, as you may have guessed from the title of this video, we found an answer to each of those questions, and the answer is a resounding no.
Batman Begins. Sadly, so do the flaws. Out of the Nolan trilogy, this film has the best character building and world building moments. The first 2/3 of the movie is really solid. Not without flaws, but pretty damn good. Then we reach the third act, and all of those small, seemingly insignificant flaws start to snowball rapidly. we're going to take a similar approach to the content creator that inspired us in the first place, which is to say that we're going to hone in on certain pillars of the story. If these pillars are broken, then the entire story that hinges upon their support fails as well. Without further ado, let's look at Batman Begins' first pillar argument, the character Rachel Dawes. We are led to believe Rachel is his best friend from minute one, where they are playing in the gardens. But once the first flashback is over, and 14 years have passed, including Bruce going off to Princeton, she acts as if Bruce is supposed to deal with the idea of his parents' killer walking free for what is essentially the greater good of getting Falcone behind bars. This would drive a massive wedge between the two, since at this point Bruce is so filled with anger that he's even willing to personally kill Chill. Then after Chill is killed and Bruce is brooding that the system is broken and Chill got what was coming to him, Rachel essentially shames him, and in the process basically proves Bruce right by taking him directly to Falcone and showing firsthand the damage that he is doing to Gotham. Now, Rachel's the assistant district attorney, I should say, and it is her job to fight men like Falcone in the courtroom. She knows what he's doing, and even knows the people that he's paid off. Then, after the training montage and Batman's first appearance at the hotel, she again shames Bruce for essentially screwing around with his wealth, but never says what it is he could be doing with that wealth to improve the city. Then, after the Scarecrow gassing scene, she once again pushes that he's screwing around while she's doing the dirty work.
I'm sorry I can't come tonight. I was just dropping off your present.
You've got better plans?
My boss has been missing for 2 days, which in this town means that I should probably start by looking at the bottom of the river.
What's wrong?
It's Falcone. Dr. Crane moved him to Arkham Asylum on suicide watch.
You're going to Arkham now. It's in the Narrows, Rachel.
You enjoy your party, Bruce. Some of us have work to do.
Acting as if, because he's not using his resources how she would, that she's better than him. Then, at the end of the film, after she kisses him, she tells him they can't be together, saying that once Gotham doesn't need Batman, then they could be together. Now, compare this message to Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, where Peter tells Mary Jane that he can't be with her. It shows him making a sacrifice so his enemies don't attack his loved ones. We, the audience, know how much he wants to be with Mary Jane. In Batman Begins, the choice is simply robbed from Bruce by Rachel, and in the process gives even further mixed signals. Are you with us so far? That's just the impact on the relationship aspect, which is a major part of Bruce's character other than the death of his parents. She's also damaging to the plot. For starters, when she's attacked at the train station, she's acting as if she knows Batman will save her. The fact that she hits the first guy with her purse, then draws her taser at the second while leaving her back exposed to someone not in her vision, which is something she would know not to do because she's spent her entire life in Gotham. She would be smarter than to turn her back on someone that's trying to attack her. It is only because Batman is coming and she seemingly knows it that this allows her to survive. Every time Rachel is with Crane, she acts openly hostile towards him. If she truly does believe in the system as much as she acts while she's berating Bruce, she would accept the insanity pleas that Crane is requesting. Then when Falcone is thrown in Arkham again, she is openly hostile to Crane, to the point she suspects that he is openly lying about Falcone's condition and demands for a second opinion. Yet after all of this, she lets Crane get into the elevator with her, pull out some keys to go to the basement, and when he tells her to follow him down the poorly lit hallway, she does so with no questions asked. Again, this woman has lived in Gotham her whole life, and knows that Falcone and his partners want her dead. She would be looking over her shoulder more than ever, yet acts like a victim in an 80s horror film. A bit later, Rachel attempts to cross the bridge to get back into the Narrows. In the shot, we can clearly see rows upon rows of riot police and SWAT forces. When a patrolman tries to stop Rachel, she tells him that she works for the DA's office. For some inexplicable reason, that works. Working in the DA's office would have no authority in this type of situation, when she could have said she needed to deliver something to Gordon. That at least would have realistically had more pull in terms of convincing that cop. After successfully delivering the inoculation to Gordon, he asks a different patrolman to escort her to safety. But once again, Rachel instantly manages to escape him so that she can remain relevant to the rest of the plot. Not only are the cops in Gotham corrupt, but they are also massively incompetent and phase in and out of existence as the writers require them to. After the toxin is released, Rachel and the young boy in her care are cornered by the inmates. Rachel grabs an officer's gun and has no issue with killing anyone who gets close to her or that kid. While we can certainly understand the desire to survive, this is something that is shown to be out of character for her. She gave Bruce quite a ration of crap about using a gun earlier in the film, but hey, I guess when the chips are down, you don't have the luxury of morals, eh, Rachel? Now, our second pillar argument is about the film's recurring theme of fear. Outside of character motivation and a few lines about the methodology, fear is rarely actually the problem in this film. Rachel talks about how the good people of Gotham are too scared to go against Falcone, when the actual problem is lack of evidence along with general corruption. Gordon, Rachel, and the district attorney act once they have the evidence. They go after Falcone with no hesitation. When you compare this to the lines about desperation, it seems like the film was leaning on that more, but fear was just the more relevant word to get its message across. Now, the third pillar argument centers around the villain's plans. In order for Crane and the League of Shadows to create the compound needed for the fear toxin, they would need some kind of chemical production facility that they are never shown to have. We can maybe theorize that they had one in the basement of Raz's house in the mountains, but that would have been blown up in the explosion, and the League do not seem to be the type to hire scientists or organic chemists, unless they put a shit ton of Chem Sci graduates through ninja training, I guess. Access to such huge amounts of fear toxin would make sense in the comics because the League is positioned all over the globe. But in the movie, they just seem to be a shadow organization that goes to places to do the job of destabilization one city at a time, and they don't seem to have that much reach when not on their quest against evil. Their current target is Gotham. Their evil plan revolves around a microwave. No, not that kind. This microwave emitter is the central component of both of the antagonist plans. While we are told that the villains are working together, Raz is not being honest with Scarecrow. So, that means there are essentially two different plans involving this weapon. And neither of them makes any sense. Now, microwaves have been around for a while. We all have at least a basic understanding of how they work. Scaling the concept up to a weapon that uses focused microwaves to vaporize an enemy's water supply in a desert environment makes sense, except that when it's turned on, it doesn't seem to work anything like a microwave at all. The emitter is first activated on a metal ship, where it destroys all of the pipes, yet does nothing to the people that are standing near it. Considering the human body is more than 60% water, and we all know what happens when metal interacts with microwaves as well, those pipes wouldn't burst. The boat would heat up immensely, not to mention the ocean water that the emitter is currently hovering over. So we can clearly see that there are issues with the device itself. But what about the two specific plans that this equipment is being used for? How do they hold up on their own? Well, let's start with Scarecrow's plan. Scarecrow has been using Carmine Falcone and his criminal organization to smuggle in large quantities of drugs, as well as the emitter itself, into Gotham. The specific drugs related to the fear toxin are sent to his facility at Arkham, where they are then refined and dumped into the water supply. We are told, verbatim,
They get any of this crap into the mains?
Oh, yeah.
Notify the water company. There's got to be a way of isolating the areas.
No, you don't understand. They put it all in. They must have been at this for weeks. Gotham's entire water supply is laced with it.
Why haven't we felt the effects?
Must be a compound that has to be absorbed in the lungs.
Scarecrow believes that the goal is to hold Gotham ransom, and that if their demands are not met, then they will use the microwave emitter to trigger the fear toxin. So, are we to believe that no one accidentally had a sip of water go down the wrong pipe? That no one has brewed any coffee or tea? Boiled water for pasta? Or, hell, taken a hot shower for weeks? If the entire water supply is truly laced with this toxin, there would be some scattered instances of people being exposed to it unintentionally. The whole point of the microwave emitter is to instantly convert all of the water into vapor and steam. While it may not be on as large of a scale or as instantaneous, heating up water the old-fashioned way would still essentially amount to the same effect. Yet we are never told about and never see any negative effects on any of Gotham's citizens. Now, with that in mind, it actually could have made for a very interesting dynamic in the film. Imagine, if you will, Gotham, but there is a high degree of atmospheric tension. Everyone is anxious and on edge, but no one really knows why. It starts out with a few isolated instances here and there, but over the weeks it's been steadily ramping up. This could have been useful for world building, character development, and for the plot. It also would have supported that recurring theme of fear that the movie was clearly trying to portray, but just didn't quite hit the mark. And if the script had been written this way, Scarecrow could have been a more formidable antagonist, or even the central antagonist for the film, the antithesis of Batman, both using fear as their primary weapon. Then we have the real plan, which is Ra's al Ghul's plan. Everything in the real plan works, or doesn't work, on pretty much the same basis as Scarecrow's plan, except for the payoff. Ra's had no intention of holding Gotham ransom. He and the League of Shadows are intent on destroying the city to rid the world of its corruption. So instead, they enable a prison break at Arkham Asylum, which causes the police to send units into the Narrows. Once all of the cops are on the island and the bridges have been raised, Ra's triggers the emitter, which covers the Narrows with fear toxin. Ra's then plans to use the train system to deliver the microwave emitter from the Narrows to the central hub at Wayne Tower. We are told that this would cause a chain reaction that will vaporize the entire city's water supply, covering all of Gotham in the fear toxin. Now, we are also clearly shown the emitter being transported via the train, triggering small bursts of the water supply on its way to Wayne Tower. This implies that the device has a limit to its range, only affecting water that is nearby. We are never given any explanation as to why getting the emitter into the central hub would somehow extend the range of the device in any way. Even if we give the film the benefit of the doubt that there are still numerous issues with this version of the plan, particularly since it fails for the same reasons the Scarecrow plan fails. So, just to recap, we've got massive issues with characters and their relationships, the poor execution of the theme, and the entire antagonistic half of the plot, including the finale, relying on an absolutely borked understanding of one of the most mundane kitchen appliances, and a very selective understanding on how steam works. Man, I sure hope things get better in the next movie.
Oh boy. Here we go. This is the big one, guys. The fattened golden calf itself. I fully expect if we get dislikes or backlash from this video, it will be specifically from this segment. Nevertheless, we must soldier on. Dark Knight should be no more removed from objective criticism than any other title. You know, Last of Us 2, Last Jedi come to mind for some reason. Without further ado, let's get to it. One of the first major issues with The Dark Knight is the character of Rachel Dawes. Again. Now, we would like to set the standard that even though the performance is different since the changing of the actresses happened, Maggie Gyllenhaal is technically playing the same character as when Katie Holmes played her. It's the James Bond effect to a degree. Each actor brought their own twist to the character while keeping the core traits. This is the importance of consistency within the series, which The Dark Knight does well. it just happens to be consistently bad. For example, Dent is annoyed that Rachel was focusing more on the fact that the mob is getting desperate than the fact that someone pulled a gun on her boyfriend in the middle of court.
We'll never be able to link the gun to Maroni, so we won't be able to charge him, but the fact that they're trying to kill you means we're getting to them.
I'm glad you're so pleased, Rachel. I'm fine, by the way.
Come on, Harvey, you're Gotham's DA. You're not getting shot at. You're not doing your job right.
Kinda doubling down on that sense of self-importance from the last film, huh? Also, a lot of Rachel's dialogue is very clunky, mainly in the scenes between her and Bruce. The scene where they talk on the balcony during the party feels like two different conversations happening at the same time. Bruce's talk about not needing Batman anymore. Rachel automatically thinks this is about them being together, like the promise she made in the last film.
You know that day that you once told me about when Gotham would no longer need Batman? It's coming.
You can't ask me to wait for that.
It's happening now. Harvey is that hero. He locked up half of the city's criminals, and he did it without wearing a mask. Gotham needs a hero with a face.
Then, when the Joker invades, she's tossed out the window. After Batman saves her, she just says,
Let's not do that again.
after being asked if she's okay. It makes her sound like she's in an 80s action film and ready to get back to ass-kicking, when this isn't that movie, and that's not how human beings talk. To make matters worse, when she talks to Bruce in his apartment about Batman turning himself in, they talk about the promise again, then they kiss. Sure, Bruce isn't blameless here, but Rachel is in a committed relationship with Harvey and just cheated on him. Another instance of her morals going out the window when it suits the plot. One quick thing before we get to the big one. Throughout the films, we are presented with the Dent Act. The name itself doesn't come up until the third film, but its influence can be felt heavily in the second film as well. We are told multiple times that Harvey Dent is the White Knight of Gotham.
You're the symbol of hope I could never be. Your stand against organized crime is the first legitimate ray of light in Gotham in decades.
This seems okay at first glance, but basically the Dent Act just functions as a sort of reoccurring character motivation for our protagonists. First off, this isn't how the legal system works. Even if Harvey was convicted for all the horrible things he does as Two-Face, that doesn't suddenly exonerate every one of the criminals that he prosecuted. Despite that reality, the film presents us with this fact repeatedly.
That means it's on you. They're all gonna come after you now, and not just the mob. Politicians, journalists, cops, anyone whose wallet's about to get lighter. Are you up to it? You better be, because they get anything on you, and those criminals are back on the streets, followed swiftly by you and me.
If anyone saw this, everything would be undone. All the criminals you pulled off the streets would be released, and Jim Gordon will have died for nothing.
But this pales in comparison to the bigger issue of the film. Take it away, Slur.
The Joker is probably the first and most frequent thing people point to when talking about this movie or why they love it. Anytime the movie comes up, there's good odds someone in the conversation gushes about how he was great, how memorable and striking his screen presence was, how he played off Christian Bale's Batman, and how it was immediately one of the most iconic interpretations the villain put to screen. It's the thing everyone who loves the movie brings up when they talk about how good it was and why it was one of the best superhero movies ever made. And that's kind of the problem. It's the one thing that gets brought up. If you haven't seen The Dark Knight in a while, I would actually like you to try for yourself to see if you can even remember the plot or what the story was in that movie, or if the main thing you remember is a handful of Joker moments being cool. Next, I want you to really rack your brain and remember what the Joker was even doing in the movie other than being cool. And I mean more than the hand-wavy bullshit like he was causing chaos or he was fighting Batman. I mean specifically. Do you remember what he was doing from story beat to story beat, or why he was doing it? And because I know there are people out there who'll try this, saying his motive is that he's crazy is Batwoman to your writing, so please don't fucking even try. I bring all this up because despite being memorable for only a handful of iconic moments, Heath Ledger's Joker is the one thing that props up the entire movie.
It has other good things about it too, obviously, like Michael Caine as Alfred and Morgan Freeman as Morgan Freeman. They were great. They both had endearing roles with a lot of charm and their own natural charisma. And the whole movie looks amazing, and the action sequence, despite a few continuity errors, were intense as fuck. And I still think Christian Bale makes for a hell of a good Batman, even if I'm less impressed by his Bruce Wayne. But none of these things elevated The Dark Knight to the level of adoration and praise that it received. None of them had it consistently ranked among the best superhero movies of all time. Heath Ledger's Joker did that, and more than a decade later looking back, I'm kind of wondering why. Like, watching the movie again without the hype of the original release and without the nostalgia goggles on, I found the Joker to be more than lacking in character development. His character is presented as a chaotic genius with a twisted, insane mind full of multi-layered and seemingly half-contradictory plans that make him a nightmare to fight for the straightforward and rational Batman, Dent and Gordon who try and take him down. This pretty much lines up with how we understand the character from the other versions of him we've seen before, but with a more gritty approach to realising it in live action, since Nolan's aim was to create a Gotham that felt like it exists in our world. It's great in theory, it's great aesthetically, but execution-wise it rings so hollow, with the plans being convoluted nonsense that either rely on the outright stupidity of everyone else to make the Joker seem like a genius by comparison, or they rely on the lazy cliche of having things just happen and the Joker takes credit at the end. Both are lazy writing, but it seems like everyone was so dazzled by Heath Ledger's performance that it got completely swept under the rug. His grand plan making no sense is even something of a meme, and it's usually dismissed as not a big deal with familiar bullshit non-arguments like, "It's a comic book movie, stop nitpicking and just enjoy it," etc, etc. But here's the thing, I do enjoy it. It's a lot of fun. All the things the Joker does in this movie are fun to watch, but when he's the main antagonist and the driving force of the plot, you need more than that. I also want to quickly clarify something. I'm drawing a firm distinction between Heath Ledger's performance of the Joker and the way the character's written. I was just as taken with the performance as every other edgy teenager in 2008, and even now it's the best part of the movie by a vast margin. His charisma and command of presence are still the most captivating parts, and he was my personal favourite interpretation of the character until Joaquin Phoenix topped it. The reason that distinction is so important is because one of the broader points I'll be trying to make is that strong characters can be acted poorly, and shite characters can be sold as game-changing if you find the right person to play them. If the surface level stuff is dazzling enough, you can get away with there being nothing underneath, to the point that it even becomes a running joke just how shallow and hollow the Joker's philosophy of pure edginess is. So I'm going to go through the Joker's involvement in the movie completely separate from the quality of Ledger's performance, keeping track of the role he's playing in the plot and what he knows or is planning at different stages throughout, or at least what we can infer either of those to be at any given time. To start with though, I'm going to jump ahead to this particular moment, because even though it means going out of chronological order, there's something I want to address earlier rather than later. There's a key quote we all remember that can, and most likely will, be misinterpreted and used as a weak argument as to why breaking down the Joker's actions is silly, or why it's okay that things around him stop making sense, and it's this.
Your man, your plan.
Do I really look like a guy with a plan?
You hear this line or see this clip out of context and you think, oh, the Joker's a guy who doesn't have plans, right? To clarify, the Joker absolutely does have a plan. In fact, he has several. He has a plan to draw Batman out of hiding, a plan to get Lau out of prison, and even in that scene he's planning to use the threat of blowing up the hospital to prove his whole philosophy that people are...
they're only as good as the world allows them to be.
Which he's also doing later when he plans to have one of the boats blow the other up. The Joker clearly has plans, he just doesn't look like he does, which fits neatly into the speaking in lies, misdirection, half-truths that he's been doing for the entire movie. Because dishonesty is one of this Joker's most defining characteristics. He lies about where his scars came from. He lies about Dent being in control of the situation with a gun to his head. He collects payment from the mob despite not having killed Batman, thereby lying about having finished the job he was hired for, though I think that might just be a continuity error since it seems like getting Lau out of custody is seen as a job well done. And when you put all that together, he also lied about being a man of his word. You get the point. He's dishonest, and the whole reason he's talking to an emotionally broken Dent is to manipulate him into redirecting his vengeful fury towards...
You know, we're living in a society...
With it being heavily implied that if he failed to convert Dent from upstanding pillar of justice to psychopath, he'd have just left him in the hospital when it blew up. I know I jumped ahead quite a bit to say that, but like I said, I wanted to address that particular argument early. And so with that tangent done and that line out of your mind for now, let's go back to the beginning and run through the Joker's part in the movie. The Joker opens with his bank heist, the one where his perfectly coordinated and supernaturally well-timed escape happens in front of multiple people who'd just seen a fucking school bus plow into the side of a bank. And also the multiple bus drivers who saw another bus drive out of the walls of a bank to join them and just went along with it. This scene is mainly just to set up how devious and maniacal he is before his main involvement with the plot, but luckily for me it also serves as a nice, isolated first example of how the NPC logic of Gotham's citizens is essential to prop up his otherwise stupid plans. This isn't even nitpicking how things on screen aren't accurate to real life physics or demand to be completely realistic in general. We literally see his escape happen in front of dozens of witnesses, but it happens fast enough on screen that you don't have time to notice that, and the time he would be caught in is off screen, and anything off screen doesn't exist, so fuck it, I guess. That's how we're introduced to both Joker and the movie. The next time we see him and his first involvement with the main plot doesn't come until the mob bosses, including the one he robbed, are having their meeting in the kitchen. Gotham is gradually being cleaned up and the long noose of the law in the form of Gordon's strike team is tightening around them. So they're getting increasingly desperate to protect themselves and their money, and as they're at their most desperate, the Joker approaches them with an offer. He will kill the Batman in exchange for half of all of their collective money. The meeting goes poorly when the mob boss he recently robbed loses his temper and, unable to kill him there and then, he puts a hit on the Joker and the Joker kills him, which means the hit no longer exists, and he'll never again have any issues with any of that gang because either that guy's bank-owning gang was just a few lads in that room, or the rest of that guy's criminal network existed off-screen and things off-screen don't count. After this, the Joker actually disappears from the movie for a bit. We don't see him until Lau squeals, like the Joker said he would, and the mob bosses are put into a more desperate situation than ever. During their trial, Judge Cirillo sees a Joker card in her court documents. This doesn't really serve any purpose to the Joker or the plot directly, it's just a signal to us that the mob brought him in, hoping that without Batman they'd be able to gradually recuperate and get things back to normal. After the court scene, we're told by Dent in the mayor's office that,
well, even if you blow enough smoke to get convictions out of Cirillo, you're gonna set a new record at appeals for quickest kick in the ass.
It won't matter. The head guys make bail, sure, but the mid-level guys, they can't. They can't afford to be off the streets long enough for trial and appeal. They'll cut deals that include some jail time. Think of all you could do with 18 months of clean streets.
And with that many of them behind bars, they would make sweeping moves toward cleaning up the streets. It's important to note that in this scene, the mayor has probably one of the most important lines of dialogue in the entire movie when he says that it's not just the mob that will be coming for Dent, that there are a lot of cops that will be out of pocket too. I bring this up here because while the movie does have this moment to establish the corruption of the GCPD, which is good, this is pretty much all of the establishment and exploration that corruption gets on screen, which is fucking anemic compared to how much of the plot it's going to be carrying later, so bear that in mind. This is when Joker makes his first move in his plan to kill Batman. The body of one of the Batman copycats hits the mayor's window right as the mayor was standing right in front of it, and a tape is released to the news detailing that the Joker intends to kill people until Batman comes out of hiding. So right now he looks like a guy with a plan, and it's as follows. 1. Exploit Batman's heroic nature and kill people in a campaign of death and chaos until Batman turns himself in, thus exposing himself and making himself vulnerable. 2. Track him down and kill him. 3. Profit. So far, pretty simple. It is unusual the news network were allowed to broadcast a blatant terror threat, and whoever dropped the not Batman body off the roof to hit the mayor's window would have had to escape that building afterwards, but both of these are still within the realms of possible, especially for someone resourceful and crafty like the Joker, so it's not a big issue. We'll just add it to the growing pile of other things that no longer matter the second they're not on screen. Moving on, his first target was a copycat of Batman to strike at Batman personally, and over the next day or so he had Commissioner Loeb's booze poisoned and a bomb put in Judge Cirillo's car. We assume he did this using some of the dirty cops in the force, but are given no details. All this is in service of the Joker's second attack, a three-pronged strike at the pillars of law and order in Gotham. The district attorney that prosecuted the mob, the judge that worked with him to get the convictions, and the police commissioner that backed the strike team who brought them in. Three prominent, high-profile figures of authority that stood for cleaning up the streets of Gotham, thereby not attacking Batman personally but undoing everything he stands for. We hear in a report given to Lieutenant Gordon that the Joker announced his intended targets ahead of time by having their DNA on his calling card. He does this on the reasonable assumption that as soon as anyone checked the card for prints and DNA, that those three people would be immediately given protective custody, keeping them where he wants them. What's not a reasonable assumption is that this revelation would come right when Commissioner Loeb is in his office and Cirillo is at home. It is fairly likely that Loeb is in there most of any given day, but by no means guaranteed, especially since this scene happens in the late evening during Dent's fundraiser after office hours. At the same time, Cirillo needs to be at home so the corrupt police can get her to get in her car rather than picking her up in theirs, which they'd have done if she was anywhere else. Also, the protective custody order prompted by Loeb's DNA on the card was to make sure he stays in his office, and Joker would need to know with reasonable certainty that not only would his protective custody be in there, but also that he would pass that time by drinking his Clyburn scotch, which is something the Joker could maybe predict with good odds if he knew the Commissioner particularly well. But he doesn't, nor are we given any reason to assume he does. This is some of what I meant earlier when I said the corruption in the GCPD would be doing a lot of heavy lifting with regards to the plan. It is possible that the corrupt officers, maybe even Wirtz and Ramirez, who are the two named officers we know about, they detailed to someone in the mob or to the Joker himself exactly what Loeb's schedule would be, how protective custody orders work, even planted the poison in there for him. But at that point the corruption is being used in excess as a make shit happen device that far exceeds any level of dedication or conviction to the mob that any, even the most corrupt, actually display in the movie. The other two targets are relatively fine, highlighting them as targets would naturally prompt bringing them into protective custody. And with what we're told in the mayor's office regarding corruption in the police, when Gordon sends some of his people to get Cirillo, all of whom Dent has had to investigate already, it's not a huge coincidence that the people who happen to get sent out, or volunteered to go out, are all complicit with the Joker's plan on behalf of the mob. You just wonder how deep in their pockets they'd have to be to assassinate a fucking judge. Which they clearly knew they were doing since they were so unsurprised by the explosion. While that's going down, Wirtz is told to go find Dent and leads Joker to the fundraiser party. In person. Without being caught on camera at all. The fundraiser scene is mostly great, but what is a bit suspect here is the fact that Joker, who is now the most wanted man in the city, and all of his men, including Wirtz and the one that got BTFO'd by Bruce, they'd all need to escape the penthouse. Which they do, by ceasing to exist when they're off screen. It's funny how that keeps happening. After this, we see Bruce in the Bat bunker, talking about how...
Targeting me won't get their money back. I knew the mob wouldn't go down without a fight, but this is different. They've crossed the line.
This is a small snippet of dialogue, but it's important for two reasons. First, it's our clue that from the perspective of the people in the movie, there's no going back to normal for the mob after that. Despite going back to normal being the premise on which Joker sold his plan to go after Batman to the mob, this is where we in the audience are learning that what he sold them was never his actual intention. As Alfred so eloquently puts it,
some men aren't looking for anything logical, like money. They can't be bought, bullied, reasoned, or negotiated with. Some men just want to watch the world burn.
And this is where we get the closest to understanding the Joker's motives, and it's a really cool line. But, as far as satisfying answers to central questions of the movie go, it kind of reminds me of another Nolan movie.
Don't try to understand it. Feed it.
And that's it. That's all we get. A very catchy and expertly delivered version of don't think about it, just go with it. It's not even that it's especially bad as a motivation, it's just extremely shallow. And it's a bit of a nothing burger as an exploration of a villain this important to the franchise. The next night's deaths are Patrick Harvey and Richard Dent, a sort of a sick prank call to the police, and at the scene of the crime he tells them that his real next target is the mayor. A message we can assume is more for Batman than Gordon. The plan to kill the mayor, we can also gather, is for maximum spread of fear and chaos, and thus maximum impact to turn people on Batman, and pressure to turn himself in. The Joker and his goons capture and replace the whole honor guard for the Commissioner's funeral, which they do off screen of course, but fine. We're shown 8 to 9 people in the apartment tied up, which seems to account for the entire honor guard we see in front of the podium during the funeral parade. That's fine, and it means there's no risk of another member of the honor guard getting suspicious, and it means that Joker can move with some backup to serve as distractions when he needs to get away. The problem is that the Joker has the most recognizable fucking facial deformity in all of Gotham. Especially after plastering his face all over every TV screen in the city and everyone being on super high alert looking for any sign of him or his bullshit, to the point where trained police just straight open fire on a window that has a curtain moved too quick. But no one, not the entire police force who were warned he'd be coming, not even the man he threatened to kill, notices him standing like a meter and a half away from him in front of the podium because his makeup is off. Which does nothing, by the way, to conceal his very obviously fucked up face. That and the sheer close proximity to the person on the highest alert for him is what makes this one of the more egregious examples of the Joker only being a genius as long as everyone around him needs to wear a fucking helmet to bed. Joker takes the shot, Gordon tanks the hit, and Joker disappears into the crowd despite still having a very noticeably fucked up face and running the opposite direction to everyone else so they could get a good look at it. But once he's off screen, he stops existing, so it's fine. Dent captures one of the goons and is interrogating him in an alley when Batman gives him the talk about Dent being the upstanding hero that the city needs. We assume that this is what reinforces Dent's belief in Batman to the point where he's willing to take the fall for him and draw the Joker out, hoping that Batman will capture him in the process. This, as far as we know, is Dent's plan. So at the point of Dent taking the fall after the press conference the next day, Joker actually confirms later on that he fully believed Dent was Batman based on the way he threw himself after Rachel. As far as we know, Joker continues to believe this until Batman turns up during the chase scene when Joker's trying to kill Dent. Once in custody, Dent's plan is to be transferred from one police facility to another, which is when he's using himself as bait. We also fill in the blank that Joker knows the route he's going to take because he's got Maroni's men on the inside, Wirtz, Ramirez, and we assume some others. This period before the chase starts is the last time the Joker's able to make preparations beforehand, and bear in mind his goons are mostly mental patients and thugs. Okay, so we arrive at the infamous plan, and as I said before, I know most of us are already aware to some degree that it doesn't make a lot of sense, but I would like to break down how and why. So before the chase starts, he has a fire truck on fire blocking the intended path that, quote, forces them into the tunnels. He has a bin truck for ramming, an IED inside a fat mental patient for his escape from prison, since he is planning to be caught, goons on some fire escapes for the helicopter, which he knows the exact route and future elevation of somehow, a shit ton of weapons to load into a stolen truck for which he shotgun kissed a cop right in the middle of the street while everyone else was off screen and didn't notice. 2 explodey warehouses with time bombs. Wirtz and Ramirez on hand ready to escort Dent and Rachel to those warehouses, despite at this point Joker thinking Dent is Batman and the point of all this is to kill him in the van, which begs the question what the plan for those 2 originally was if he actually succeeded in killing Dent, which he was absolutely trying to do. And of course, since it's basically obligatory, and here we go. The chase begins after the convoy is, quote, forced into the tunnels by the fire truck. The NPCs in the van act like this is the obvious and only option, but all these other streets are fucking empty. There's enough room to squeeze past the flame and fire truck if they were so desperate to maintain their original route. In fact, since this is obviously a trademark Joker thing set up to divert them, it would even be worth forcing their way past it just to refuse his attempt. Or failing that, this city is clearly laid out in a grid pattern and they can just take a quick detour around the city block to their left and get back to their course on the other side. So we get another instance here of people's stupidity accommodating the Joker, not that the plans are good on their own. After going down into the tunnels, they're being rammed and herded by the bin truck when the larger truck that's carrying Joker and his weapons pulls up alongside them. This boxes them in so Joker can take potshots at the van that's carrying Dent to try and kill him. After whittling down the convoy, Joker is firing on Dent's vehicle when Batman turns up, and remember that this is the only point we know that he knows that Dent is not Batman and he adjusts his plan to kill both of them. From there, Batman boost jumps a car, which is something he's never done.
She was built as a bridging vehicle. During combat, 2 of these would jump over a river towing cables. And over here on the throttle, flip that open and throttle up. This will boost you into a rampless jump.
And it gets immediately RPG'd, spins out through a couple of concrete walls and forces Batman onto his bike as he leaves the burnt out husk of the Batmobile there, presumably to be picked up by the GCPD. The goons take out a helicopter by setting themselves up on both the perfect course and elevation of it as it's approaching, and they nail the shot so perfectly that the wreckage nails the van Dent is in without it even stopping him as Batman is taking a shortcut, it looks like through some shopping centre type place. As the chase gets towards the destination, Batman uses his bike's grapple gun to cause the truck to defy all sense of how trucks work, and this gets the Joker out onto the street so Batman can drive at him. Batman though swears the last second because no killing. Batman doesn't kill people, right? And he KOs himself in the wreckage of the truck. Joker then jumps on him and is about to kill him when Gordon puts a shotgun to his head and arrests him, which remember he was planning to have happen. And that's where the chase scene ends, with a string of other people's stupid decisions and the laws of physics themselves bending around Joker's will to prop him up as an evil genius. Once he's captured, he needs to keep track of the time so that he can let them know the locations of Dent and Rachel in just enough time for them to be forced to choose between them. And when I say he needed to keep track of time, I mean he would have needed to keep perfect track of time, while also accounting for a fuck ton of things he would have no way of knowing, like how Batman would be able to get to his chosen location in the nick of time, but Gordon's cruiser would be just a little bit too late, that Batman would be there at all, that there would be no patrol cars much nearer to the bomb sites, etc. But with all that, the plan still makes no sense. Having 2 targets to rescue and the urgency of the time limit is his plan to empty the PD as much as possible so he can escape with Lau. But we see that after he makes the threat, Gordon and Ramirez go out to get who they think is Dent. If Batman weren't there, another squad car goes out to get Rachel, and that still leaves the PD very much populated. So in reality, it serves as more of a means to get Batman out of the way, despite Joker not knowing that he would even be there. Remember, at the point of making his plan, Dent was Batman as far as he was concerned. Even assuming the plan is not absolutely static and that the Joker adjusted where he could to accommodate changing circumstances, the fact that anything at his disposal now is something he had to have set up before the chase means the warehouses were set up originally to present the same "you can only save one" dilemma, with 2 different targets. Because if things went as planned, then Dent would be dead, wouldn't he? And Rachel then wouldn't matter to the Joker as a target. So the default targets being Dent, who he thinks is Batman, and Dent's girlfriend only works if he was planning for them both to be alive at the end of the chase despite his best efforts. You could allow some leeway for contingencies in the Joker's plan and say that if Dent were to be alive at the end of the chase, that Dent plus Rachel would be the targets, and if Dent were dead, another 2 people would be the targets. No matter how the chase turned out, Wirtz and Ramirez would kidnap whoever the plot needed them to. Our explanation is that however things happened, we're told the Joker planned ahead of time for it to happen that way.
Back at the MCU, the Joker's gone.
With Lau? The Joker planned to be caught. He wanted me to lock him up in the MCU.
It's even implied later on that they were actually told to take Dent and Rachel, meaning he also planned for Dent to survive the chase, which makes no fucking sense. But that's just how this seems to work. Anytime you get one up on the Joker, he was somehow planning to fail that time, so it doesn't count. That's not evil genius, it's lazy. And speaking of lazy, there's that corruption doing the heavy lifting again. How deep exactly in the mob's pocket are they that they kidnapped the fucking DA and his assistant / girlfriend and bring them to exploding warehouses? Because there's no way that Wirtz and Ramirez are under the illusion that they're delivering the targets to the warehouses with the plan being for them to survive somehow. Dent even brings this up later. As for the Joker planning to be caught, which Gordon points out at Rachel's death site, this implies that the Joker was planning to kill Dent Batman, as he understood it, get caught on purpose, set off the IED Fat Man, who, by the way, was arrested with stellar fucking timing, and escape with Lau. And he somehow planned this without knowing ahead of time that the GCPD would be accommodating enough, i.e. their stupidity would once again help enough, to station an officer in the interrogation room
for no reason!
Nor did he know when making his plan that there would be some broken glass with which to hold that same officer hostage, or that this tactic would successfully get him the phone he needed to set off the fat fucking mass destruction that only he and Lau are immune to, since it takes out all the cops around both of them. Joker's a bit dusty but otherwise fine, and despite the officers 3 feet away getting unconscious or dead, Lau is looking fucking pristine. Best guess is that the Joker used smaller explosives to make himself immune to larger ones, or at least more resistant than all those cops that were the same distance from the blast but got fucking evaporated. This is an awful lot of things that happen to line up exactly the way they need to in order for anything the Joker does to work, even when it shouldn't. It's like the script is actively bending itself into a pretzel around him just to get him from A to B, so that when the show is over, everyone can marvel in horror at how it all went exactly as he wanted it to.
The Joker planned to be caught. He wanted me to lock him up in the MCU.
This is the lazy cliche I was talking about earlier, where rather than actually come up with a devastatingly cunning plan for the villain, you just kind of have them take credit for whatever random bullshit happened to end up happening. It's a cheap way to make them seem far more devious and cunning than anything they actually do or say in the movie would lead us to believe. And this is the part where most people agree that it doesn't make a lot of sense, but for some reason they'll flinch when you try and call any of it what it actually is. It's bad writing. And we're not even done. The next time we see Joker, he's in a warehouse meeting the Chechen, while at the same time Coleman Reese is being interviewed on TV about Batman's identity. We don't know how much time has passed between now and when Joker got away from the police, but it looks like it's the next day. Joker's presenting Lau along with his half of the money as if getting Lau was the job he was hired for rather than killing Batman, but neither the Chechen or anyone else seems to think this is weird. And for the most part, this scene is actually alright. It even has another cool speech to be endlessly quoted. And the Joker asserts he doesn't need all the money, he only needs enough for his explosives and to buy the loyalty of the Chechen's men. The problem isn't the scene itself, it's more the fact that from here on out the powers of off-screen will be going absolutely ham. You see, right after this, the Joker makes his call to the TV station and makes his threat to blow up a hospital if the people of Gotham don't kill Coleman Reese within an hour. This means that off-screen, before this scene, after escaping the station, Joker got the mob's money, took it to the warehouse, bought all of his explosives, paid his new employees their sign-on bonus, made a cash mountain display with Lau on top, and here's the important one, all of those bombs are already in the fucking hospital. A working hospital had all those individual bombs in all of those rooms and the massive bombs that collapsed the building at the end hidden around the place this whole time. How'd Joker's goons, who we know are a bunch of brainlets, get in there, plant all those bombs, and get out again with no one getting caught or no one finding a single bomb before now? We don't know, and apparently we don't need to worry about it. He did it all off screen and everything's happening so fast you don't get time to think about it, and why would you want to? Shut up and consume the pretty fireworks. He already had the bombs in the hospital because he has what he needs, where and when he needs it, whether or not it makes a lick of sense, including himself, because in the middle of all the chaos he sneaks into the hospital in full makeup and a nurse's Halloween costume. How did he do that? Doesn't matter, it was off screen. Anyway, he gets into Dent's room and we come back to a scene I've touched on already, the nurse scene. This is where Joker comes to a thoroughly broken Harvey Dent and we get this whole speech. I covered this earlier, but to expand a little, everything the Joker says in this scene is bullshit. It's lies manipulation meant to redirect Dent, I've covered that, but what I didn't really cover is why. The Joker himself explains this later.
I took Gotham's White Knight, and I brought him down to our level. It wasn't hard. See, madness, as you know, is like gravity. All it takes is a little push.
And that's all this was. That's what he's doing. This scene is Dent's little push. And if it didn't go the way the Joker wanted, he would have left him tied to the bed when the hospital exploded. When Dent had a gun to the Joker and was leaving it to a coin flip whether he would shoot a man in the head, Joker knew his manipulative shit was working. And if the coin flip didn't come up the way he wanted, his hand was on the hammer of the gun. This is actually one of the better minor details of the movie. His plan for the whole scene is to give Dent that little push so either Dent falls from grace and turns his vengeful fury towards Gordon and everyone else, or he gets taken out in the blast. Either way, Joker wins. So even though we only got here with the power of off-screen no jutsu...
Do I really look like a guy with a plan?
Yeah, motherfucker.
Speaking of off-screen shenanigans, get a load of this shit. So the hospital is exploding, right? And what happens next is that the Joker's goons are already in control of the bus, presumably holding people at gunpoint in case they do anything stupid. They grab the news guy to kidnap him for what happens next, but look at where this is happening relative to where everyone else in the scene is shown to be standing. This happens basically right in front of everyone. But okay, maybe they weren't paying attention or they were obscured or whatever, fine. But what they absolutely were paying attention to was the Joker taking a casual fucking stroll right up to that same bus that's right in fucking front of them and drive off. He literally cheeses Gotham City's Skyrim NPC tier AI to avoid detection. Now this seems like more of a direction flaw than a writing one. Nolan clearly had a slick idea of the sequence of events he wanted and of the shots he wanted. The problem is that he completely neglected to think about what the geography of the scene would look like, especially to anyone sparing even a second to think about what the scenery looks like beyond the edge of what the camera shows. And that's not just here either. I've mentioned it a few times now that things cease to exist when they're not on screen, but I think this has to be the most egregious example. And I completely missed this even having seen the film multiple times, but when you notice the pattern, it is so hard to unnotice. And then when you see Harvey Dent actually use off-screen no jutsu to fucking delete a guy, it just becomes unintentionally hilarious. The Joker uses the news guy they kidnapped to broadcast his message that says the tunnels are fucked, so everybody rushes to pile onto a ferry for the boat experiment, which he believes will say a lot about society.
You know, we're living in a society!
And we're finally here, the boat scene. This is one of the parts of the movie everyone remembers reasonably well, and the issues here aren't much different from everything else I've covered so far, so we have more of the same. He got all of those explosives, a whole PA system, and his special off switch onto the boats, and either everyone else was off screen at the time, or whenever someone saw him, he went,
I have an idea.
Which seemed legit to them, so there was no issue the social experiment goes ahead. Except it doesn't. Batman and the GCPD are here to stop him, or they would if it weren't for the fact they can't see the clowns are duct taped through their scopes, even though we in the audience clearly can. But at the end of it, Joker goes to blow up both boats, gets stopped, Batman yeets him off the building, shoots his foot with a grapple hook to finally call him out for being toxic, and Joker responds that Batman won't kill him because they need each other.
Who's gonna give you a reach around?
And with that, his reign of being an AI cheese and prick is ended. There is some other shit that happens, but this is the last time we see Joker. Heath Ledger's Joker was almost instantly iconic, being very formative for a whole generation of edgelord and being embedded in pop culture. And honestly, the fact that that happened when the character's written this fucking sloppily is its own kind of impressive. And having been an edgy boy myself back in 2008, I even know how it happened. If instead of the writing I was focused on critiquing the film's aesthetic or quotability, or even just the performance of the actors, I would be taking an entirely different tone. But writing is what I prefer to focus on, and looking more honestly back at this movie, a movie I still have some fondness for in spite of everything, the Joker is written like absolute arse, and he's not even the only thing wrong with the movie, just the biggest thing. I'm also aware that to a lot of people, even looking at this movie in this kind of detail, or analysing its writing at all, will seem like nitpicking, or like I can't just enjoy things. And maybe that's true, but riddle me this, fucko. If a movie's good, why do you have to turn your brain off to enjoy it? Don't most great pieces of media get called great in the first place because they actually get better the more you think about them? There are a lot of movies that are a ton of fun to just zone out to and take in the keys being jangled in front of your face. I even agree that this is one of them. But that's kind of the problem. When you say that that's how a movie's meant to be enjoyed, you're already conceding that it's not, nor could it ever be, great. Taking that stance is saying that it's best enjoyed as a passing fancy, that trying to engage with it beyond the surface level is wrong or silly. Any movie that can be described like that doesn't deserve to be considered one of the best of anything. Most of the nostalgic praise I've seen thrown at this movie pretty much amounts to, "Aw man, the Joker was so cool," and the story gets mostly forgotten, with the core conflict of the entire movie barely even being remembered at all, let alone fondly. This isn't incredibly unusual, since the antagonist is often one of the most memorable parts of a hero's story, but that's usually because they're forces of personality with clearly defined objectives and whose actions towards achieving those objectives drive the plot. They become the metric against which the hero is measured. And when your villain is superficially memorable because they have a nice edgy aesthetic and a bunch of quotable catchphrases, but their role in the story is incoherent, or they only achieve anything when the plot bends around them, and characters in the vicinity have idiot balls for brains, it takes away from both the hero being measured against them and makes the conflict of the story forgettable and hollow. Heath Ledger's performance was stellar, but if that's the only thing propping up an otherwise average movie, then I'm sorry, but your movie is average at best and kind of broken at worst.
Do you feel in charge?
Before we dive into The Dark Knight Rises, we need to address a loose end from The Dark Knight. One of the subplots of The Dark Knight involves a Wayne Enterprises employee named Coleman Reese, who discovers Batman's identity and then tries to blackmail Bruce Wayne to keep this information secret. Mr. Fox sort of turns this into a joke, dismissing him and telling him, "Good luck blackmailing a man who beats criminals within an inch of their life." Later on in the film, Reese ends up on a talk show, prepared to reveal the identity of the Batman for the greater good of Gotham. The Joker doesn't like this one bit and gives Gotham 1 hour to murder Coleman Reese or threatens to blow up a hospital. Bruce Wayne ends up saving Coleman Reese's life, but this is not the issue. Once his life has been spared and the hospital blown up, the movie sort of forgets about him. Now, this does not cause an issue in The Dark Knight per se, but it does in The Dark Knight Rises. Perhaps I should clarify. The existence of Coleman Reese actually works to the film's benefit. It would have resolved one of the most glaring plot holes in The Dark Knight Rises. How did Bane know where all the Wayne Tech gadgets were stored? How did he know that Batman was directly connected to Wayne Tech at all? Simply put, he didn't. However, if Bane would have dropped in on our good friend Coleman Reese when he first arrived in Gotham, they could have had a very informative chat. After all, by this point in time, Coleman Reese has already gone on television and told the whole world he knows Batman's identity. Just because Batman saved him from the other vigilantes of Gotham doesn't mean he is now permanently safe. He's still a very risky loose end, one that either Batman would have to relocate into protective custody, or that Bane could have used to connect a whole lot of dots very quickly. As Joker said of Lau,
"He'll find him and make him squeal. I know the squealers when I see them."
But, as stated earlier, that's more of a problem with Rises. Speaking of which, as we said earlier, the third installment of this trilogy is almost universally agreed to be the weakest of the three films, even by stalwart defenders of the franchise. As the saying goes, all great things must come to an end. This just wasn't the ending that they were hoping for. Some of the problems in Dark Knight Rises carry over or share similarities with issues from the previous two films, but then it also introduces a whole new host of problems as well. Let's look at the relationships of Bruce Wayne and Batman over the course of the trilogy. Now, granted, they've never been particularly strong, but The Dark Knight Rises takes that to an absurd degree. Instead of just having the back and forth will they, won't they with Rachel like they did in the first two movies, they have tripled the relationship drama. Bruce is clearly still reeling from Rachel's death in The Dark Knight, and while her character isn't in the film, her presence in the story can certainly be felt. It is this grief and sadness over her loss that drives many of the character decisions in the film, particularly for Bruce and Alfred. But in Rises, we add Selina Kyle, aka Catwoman, to the mix. This relationship is both incredibly forced and rushed, while also expecting the audience to accept this as Bruce's happy ending. Listen, we get it. Catwoman is a thief, so naturally that's how they meet. Bruce catches her stealing from Wayne Manor. She steals not only his mother's pearl necklace, but also his fingerprints. He catches up with her at the party, where she steals his car. The fingerprints she stole were used by Bane to mess with Wayne Enterprises and get him removed from the board of directors. Catwoman even leads Batman into Bane's trap in the sewers, so basically Catwoman is directly responsible for every bad things that happen to Bruce in this entire film? Wow. How romantic. Then, to make things even messier, allow me to direct your attention to one Miranda Tate, aka Talia al Ghul. Another relationship that is forced and rushed, but this time for the sake of a plot twist during the film's climax. Miranda is shown to be a fellow philanthropist and a member of the Wayne Enterprises board of directors, but is secretly, dun dun dun, Talia al Ghul, the daughter of Ra's al Ghul from Batman Begins. Her evil plan seems to be to infiltrate Wayne Enterprises, thereby gaining access to the nuclear reactor, and then sleeping with Bruce Wayne for, revenge? I guess? Well, then she literally stabs him from behind after his fight with Bane. Okay, so honestly, her involvement as a romantic consideration at all doesn't really add anything to the film or to the characters. I mean, she still could have been the villain without needing to get close to Bruce. Her goals had already been realized. Now, it's important to acknowledge the themes of any film. Even people who joke about "my themes" have to admit, but The Dark Knight Rises was much less subtle and ambiguous than its predecessors. The film repeatedly beats you over the head with its morals and themes. Rich people are bad, poor people are good, but honestly, the truth is never that simple. The film even goes through the effort to bankrupt Bruce so that he's no longer an evil rich man, even though that has little to no effect on the plot or his ability to function as Batman. They just wanted to put him on the morally correct side of the conflict so the audience could root for him guilt-free, I guess? So, continuing the trend from the previous films, the villain's plans in The Dark Knight Rises seem fine upon first glance, but absolutely fall to pieces under scrutiny. Let's take a look, shall we? I would like to note that technically, trapping all of the police officers wasn't specifically part of their plan, or at the very least it's unclear. It just so happened that Commissioner Gordon was stupid enough to play into that trap, even after witnessing firsthand how well that worked out for Commissioner Loeb when he invaded the Narrows. Come on, Jimbo, you're better than this. The whole climax of this film has so many issues. Gotham is under siege, held hostage from the rest of the country by Bane and his nuclear weapon for 5 whole months.
If you move it, the core will decay in a matter of months.
5 by my calculations.
Then it will go off.
And for the sake of your children, Dr. Pavel. Indeed, I hope it does.
This is insane on multiple levels. For starters, 5 months is a long time. The longer your mission takes, the more likely that something could go wrong. Logistically, Bane has to find ways to keep everyone fed, even though the city is cut off from the rest of the country. We also have to keep in mind that the American government is, well, let's just say notorious for refusing to negotiate with terrorists. From what we are shown, Bane's plan basically hinges upon the government's cooperation, which they flat out wouldn't do. The duration of time also begs the question, what exactly is their goal? Bane is shown by the end of the film to basically be Talia's personal bitch. Not all that much different than Bane was to Poison Ivy back in the Schumacher films. A real detriment to his character, by the way. Now, Talia is hell-bent on finishing the work her father started. So, with that in mind, why wait? She has a fucking bomb. Batman has been defeated and thrown into a prison, forced to watch his city suffer and burn. Talia could easily detonate the device at any time while her and Bane ride off into the sunset. Mission accomplished. Instead, they just sort of sit it out and wait for Batman to show up and defeat them dramatically as the timer ticks down. Way to go, guys. That's a great plan. They establish that there's a trigger man and that it could blow at any time, whilst also knowing that that timer is ticking down, and all the while being content to just sit tight and wait it out. And hey, if that's their intention, then that's fine. But why wait for 5 months beforehand, sitting around in the snow, watching Scarecrow live out his reality TV judge fantasies in real time? What purpose does that serve, other than to give Gotham a wide window of opportunity to fuck them over? The second Talia saw Batman was back in the city, she could have ended all of them together right then and there. It may seem like an odd thing to address, but one of the main things that affected this film's legacy was the memes. Perhaps the most famous of which was none other than Bane's voice. From the very first time we're introduced to this character until his unceremonious final moments, every line uttered by this character was an absolute gem. Not because of what he is saying per se, but because of his absolutely tismy voice.
No one cared who I was till I put on the mask.
If I pull that off, will you die?
It would be extremely painful.
You're a big guy.
For you.
Which is now basically the official voice for this character. Just go watch the Harley Quinn animated show or the Lego Batman movie for further confirmation.
Chicken satay?
Yeah, sure. I will blow you up, you chicken satay.
Now, the rest of the problems in this film have been touched on by anyone with a brain, since they don't seem to share the luxury that The Dark Knight did. Where The Dark Knight moved from scene to scene before you could think about it, this film gives you plenty of time to think about how stupid it's being. But for the sake of argument, let's do this. Number 1. How did Bruce get back to Gotham? He has no money or resources to get back from whatever Middle Eastern country he's being held prisoner in. Number 2. When and how did he paint the gas in the shape of a bat onto that bridge? That's a pretty huge waste of time when you've got hours before the bomb goes off. Just to send a message, I guess. Number 3. Batman is just straight up shooting at the truck cabin that Talia is in? What happened to no guns, no killing, Bruce? Number 4. How does Bruce make it out of the bat alive? He's bleeding heavily from the knife wound, and we are told that the bat doesn't have an autopilot. When did he have time to program one? And even if he did, there's no way he could have cleared the blast zone in time.
Now that those points are out of the way, I have some spark notes that we made throughout the entire trilogy. I'd actually like to start with the gadgets of this seemingly realistic universe.
All of the tools that he uses, therefore, have to have some credible basis in scientific reality.
Let's start with the Batpod. This couldn't be part of the original Tumblr design due to the absurd nature of a soldier using his motorcycle ejection seat in the middle of combat. and the idea that Batman put it in is almost equally absurd, considering the entire structure of the car would need to be redesigned. Something that comic book Batman could probably do, but not this version. Also,
Wayne! Mr. Wayne! Mr. Wayne!
how could a simple button that Bruce had at the party work on cars, motorcycles, and lights connected to a city's power grid when the vehicles are independent of that? And let's not forget this little tidbit here. How does a vehicle that roars anytime you even remotely step on the gas have a stealth mode? Let alone the fact that it works because the cops have the same AI as Chief Wiggum.
Oh my God, it just disappeared! It's a ghost car!
It is essentially turning the engine's sound off and turning the lights off as the cops are less than 5 feet away.
I can fix this. Morty, sit here. Summer, you sit here. Now listen, I know the two of you are very different from each other in a lot of ways, but you have to understand that as far as Grandpa's concerned, you're both pieces of shit. Yeah, I can prove it mathematically. Actually, let me grab my whiteboard. This has been a long time coming anyway.
As we've covered during each individual film, there is a common thread in this trilogy that the villain's plans make little to no sense under the most basic examination. They say a hero is as only good as their villain. And if there's any truth to that, then the Nolan-verse Batman must be an absolute joke. Out of the 3 films, each and every one of the villain's plans are significantly flawed, to the point of being entirely nonsensical. So, 0 of 3 isn't exactly a passing grade. Does Batman kill? Should he cross that line? Many, both creators and fans alike, would argue that not killing is a core part of Batman's character. It's what separates him from bloodthirsty vigilantes hell-bent on revenge such as the Punisher. There are some interesting arguments on both sides of the debate, but that's not what we're here to discuss today. What we're here to discuss is that people who like to hate on other versions of Batman, such as Keaton or Affleck, will often point to this trilogy as an example of a true Batman, one who doesn't kill. They'll talk about how this representation of Batman is respectful of the character and of the source material. This is what we're here to dispute with no hesitation or uncertainty. The Nolan universe Batman is absolutely a murderer. He may not have the body count of some of the other Batmen, it may not even be as extensive, but there is no doubt he has already crossed the line of his supposed one rule. Perhaps one of the most blatant and problematic examples of this Batman killing is in the finale of Batman Begins. After beating Ra's in the train fight, Batman chooses not to kill Ra's, but instead claims,
"You finally learned to do what is necessary. I won't kill you." But I don't have to save you.
Now this makes for a satisfying line, but ultimately this boils down to semantics. Not saving Ra's in this scenario is the same as killing him. Batman should absolutely rescue Ra's from the train if he's supposed to be the Batman that does not kill. The finale of Dark Knight is just as bad. While some might argue that this situation is a bit more complex than the finale of Begins, namely because Harvey has Gordon's son held hostage at gunpoint, if you are one of those Batman purists who believe that Batman should never kill under any circumstances, then we cannot allow this to slide either. Batman's code is a huge part of his character, so yes, of course his priority would be rescuing the child from the crazed gunman. But he would have found a way to disable or disarm the gunman without killing him. Instead, Batman just tackles Harvey over the edge, also putting the child at risk. He is able to rescue the child and hand him back to his parents before falling off the ledge himself. The fall kills Harvey, but Batman conveniently survives. So far we are 0-2 on the finales. Batman has killed one of the primary antagonists of each film. I wonder if the third film will be any different. Oddly enough, even though the third film is the weakest of the 3, it actually follows Batman's one rule the best. That said, it's still not murder-free either. During the finale, yet again, Batman is using the bat to try and stop Talia from detonating the bomb. He attempts to stop the truck by raining down heavy machine gun fire and rockets from above. This kills the driver of the truck outright. Shortly after that, the truck plummets through the guardrail onto the lower section below. This fall kills Talia. I suppose if you really want to give the film credit, you could say that her death is not on Batman, but that's a real stretch. So what about our other antagonist of the film, Bane? Well, Batman didn't kill him directly, but Catwoman used the weapons of the Batpod to blast Bane into chunks. So maybe we'll count that as half a point against Batman? As I said, this movie tries to follow the code a little bit more than the previous two entries. However, both antagonists end up dying in this film. Whereas in the last two films, it was only one of them. That's 0 to 3. This Batman, who allegedly doesn't kill, has a pretty high KD ratio.
Now, it may seem odd considering how much of this video has been spent criticizing the flaws of these movies, but please hear me. I absolutely love this trilogy. Flawed as it is, they're an important part of pop culture and the ongoing journey of converting comic book stories into films. It's important to understand the difference between objective criticism that acknowledges the flaws of a film and the subjective analysis of how a film made you feel. You are allowed to like any movie you want. The feelings you experience as you watch the film are valid. That's the beauty of subjectivity. No one can ever take that away from you. The difference in objective analysis is that we can recognize those flaws or strengths when appropriate and use them to assess the media without subjective bias. The writing is either strong and high quality, or it is weak and poorly written. Perhaps it falls somewhere between those two grades, but that's the point. It can be assessed. We set out to see if this beloved film franchise that was such a huge part of our childhoods stood up to the same degree of scrutiny as media such as The Last Jedi, The Last of Us Part 2, or any of the others that get regularly torn apart by EFAP. It's easy to claim objective standards when the art being ripped apart over and over is something infuriating that you hate and despise. It's fun, it's cathartic. But it's important that we continue to apply this standard equally across the board. We must be able to apply the same degree of scrutiny to the things that we love and see how they hold up. This is how we grow as critics, conversationalists, and most importantly, as fans of the arts.
Thank you so much for watching. This has been by far our biggest project and took months between scripting, voiceovers, and then being going into my editing closet for long periods of time. All while doing the podcast every Sunday. If you want to see more stuff like this, hit that subscribe button.
Jog on.